Just when they call him for it, he comes up, he takes his pen, he's about to sign. The largest of the founding fathers was a guy named Colonel Benjamin Harrison. Now, Harrison's huge. I mean, he's a big guy. And he was big enough, he could have been a middle linebacker. Well, probably big enough for USC, but not big enough for Texas. I mean, he wasn't that. He was a big guy, all right? And they're he decides, I'm going to break the silence of this, what really became the most important political moment in history. And he does so by saying this: little guys up front, big guys in the back, everybody's worried about when they're going to be hung. He says, I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Jerry, when we're hung for what we're now doing. He said, by the size and great weight of my body, well, I'll be dead within a minute or two. By the lightness of yours, you're throwing a dance in the air for an hour or more before you're dead. True story. Only words spoken during the signing of our Declaration of Independence. Now, the reason I tell you that is because, first of all, I think it's funny. But secondly, I think it really cracks open the head of those guys, and it lets us know what they were thinking. They knew this was a death warrant. They knew this was it. And yet they were willing to get up, come forward, take that pen, dip it in ink, and sign beneath that amazing final sentence. It says, in support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now, they understood what the sacrifice would be. And they didn't just pledge lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. They gave their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. They didn't just get excited around and go home and forget about it. They followed through on the commitment. History says not one of these guys backed down. They watched their sons be killed in the war. They watched their homes go up in smoke. They lost their wives. 4 of the wives decided to not survive. One of them, in fact, was arrested. She was at their home. It was Elizabeth Lewis. Francis Lewis was the sire. His wife Elizabeth at home when the British get to their house, and he's not there, and she stands on the front porch. They're going to torch the house. She says, "You're not taking my home." They fire a cannonball at her. Literally goes right between her legs into the house. She still doesn't live. She says, "I'm not going anywhere." They drag her off the court, throw her in prison, abuse her so bad she ends up dying of it as a result of it. But story after story after story, the sacrifices that were made just to birth the nation in the first place. It was absolutely with impossible odds, and yet it happened, and we got our independence. So that Declaration of Independence was nearly impossible. The Constitution itself, of course, as you know, when they gathered, they were not gathering to put together a new Constitution. They were supposedly just going to be modifying the Articles of Confederation. So that was their first challenge, was the fact that they made the decision to literally start over as a result of the shortcomings of the Articles of Confederation. Then you had, obviously, the debate between the big states and the small states, and that ended up in the Great Compromise. And you had the issue of slavery, which ended up in the 3/5 Compromise, which is not a pro-slavery clause, it's an anti-slavery clause. When you read those guys, what they debated there at the convention, you read even the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass and his reading and studying that he finally figured out that's actually an anti-slavery clause, because what they were saying to the states that, you like that, thank you very much. Anyway, it's true though, and we've allowed people to lead us to believe that was a process. Not at all. What they were saying was, look, if you're not going to allow black people to vote, if a black man can't vote, then you can't count them in your representation. We're not going to give you extra congressmen for people that you're not even allowing to vote. So that's why they came to the 3/5. They said, we're going to punish the states that are not allowing blacks to vote as well. So that was a big challenge for them to overcome. Then just the ratification itself. All of these things were huge, huge, huge challenges. And there's the convention, and at one point they just gave up. I mean, they said, this is not going to work. We're not going to reach an agreement. We might as well leave. They've been at it for more than a month. It's almost 5 weeks they've been at it, and they finally decided to give up. So the elder statesman, Benjamin Franklin, decides he's going to try to save the day and gets up to address the group. Now Franklin at the time of the Constitutional Convention, the guy 81. Now I used to think 81 was old. I don't believe that anymore. In fact, not only because it's beginning to seem younger to me, but in fact, I was a congressman a few years ago that had just turned 81, and we were doing an event, and he got up, and he was speaking first, and he was introduced to me, and he looked over at me, and he said, "Rick," he said, "I bet you think 81 is old." I didn't say anything for it. He said, "Listen, I just turned 81 last week." He said, "But I went to Senator Strom Thurman's 100-year birthday party." And he said, at that birthday party, Senator Thurman looked over at me, and he said, "Oh, I'll be 80 again." So 80 is young today, that's my point, all right? Back then, 80 was not so young. The average lifespan back then was 35. This guy's 81, man, he's the elder statesman. When he speaks, everybody's going to listen. He gets up at that point where it looks like no one would reach agreement, and he begins to remind them. June 28, 1787, he starts off with this. He says, "Mr. President, the small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks of close attendance and continual reasonings with each other, our different sentiments on almost every question is methinks a melancholy proof of the imperfection of human understanding. He said, look at some of the greatest minds in the world right here in this room. We're not getting anywhere. We're trying everything we can, and we're coming up short. The human understanding is not perfect. He said, we indeed seem to feel our own want of political wisdom since we have been running about in search of it. We've gone back to ancient history for models of government and examined the different forms of those republics which now no longer exist. In fact, we viewed modern states all around Europe to find none of their constitutions suitable to our circumstances. Only the folks in Washington would still look at Europe and say it's not suitable. They have the exact same view. He said, in this situation, this assembly, and this is really kind of where we are in America, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us. Think about it, that's what we're doing right now. We've got this debate going on in our nation. Do we go to socialism, or do we come back to free enterprise and the principles that make the country great? The people don't know. They're wondering. They're trying to figure out which way do we go. We're groping in the dark. He says, how is it, how can it happen, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of light to illuminate our understanding? Then he reminds us, in the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Now, he's one of only 6 guys who signed both the Constitution, 1787, and also 11 years previously signed the Declaration of Independence right there in that exact same room. So he can say to everybody else in the room, I was in here. I was in this room when we didn't have a chance. We were going to take on the greatest military on the planet. There's no way we can win without God on our side. He said our prayers were heard and they were graciously answered. All of us engaged in the struggle must observe frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. Then he asked what we need to ask today, have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I've lived for a long time. The longer I live, the more convincing